Hi, this is Michelle at Simply Scaife Handmaiden. We're working today on piecing our fabric strips. As you can see, I have my strips laid out and setting next to the sewing machine. And right here, I'm going to show you, I already started the first set of 5 strips. And I've got them stitched together. When we flip it over, we can see that the seam allowances are even. They're pressed in the same direction. And that's what we're going to work on right now. When I start quilting, I prefer to work left to right on a quilt as much as I can. I always go from the left side of my quilt blocks toward the right, especially on this. It just keeps it consistent. So this would be the first strip, strip 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the first thing that we do when we come over to the machine is we take strip number 1 and we're going to lay it right side up. We want the pretty side of the fabric facing us. Then we will take strip number 2 and we're going to put the pretty side right side down. So when we look at it, both of the right or the colorful sides of the fabric are facing each other. And strip number 2, our new, is on top. Now many people like to pin their quilt strips together, and you're more welcome to do that. I don't. Sometimes I will use a old hair clip to clip my fabric and hold it in place. I don't always do that, and that's just me. I find pinning kind of tedious, but I've been sewing for a long time and I'm comfortable with that. So pin if you feel the need to. Remember, we want a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, and we want to stitch at a speed that we're comfortable with. You don't want to go too fast, that we cause our stitches to bunch or bundle, and we don't want to stitch too slow as to frustrate ourselves. So go at a speed that's comfortable for you. If you've been quilting for a long, or stitching for a long time, then you probably already know the speed and comfort level that you sew at. If this is rather new to you, you can always practice on a scrap of fabric. And it's like driving a car. You know, your foot needs to be able to coordinate with your hands, and you need to be able to move the fabric at a speed that's comfortable. Now I wanted to point out something. I am not moving this fabric. The feed dogs on my machine are doing most of the work. I'm simply kind of guiding it along, making sure that I don't pass my 1/4 inch barrier. And I'm really just letting the machine work. I don't want to force the fabric under there because I'll get puckers and tucks. And I don't want to pull away from it because then I'll end up with some stretching and some very wonky looking strips when I get finished. Remember that fabric is very stretchy, and you can stretch it out of place and end up with some very misshapen quilt pieces. And nobody wants to see that. That would be very frustrating. So let the machine and the fabric work together and move at a pace that they're comfortable with. Once we get the stitches done, we're going to move over to the ironing board to set these seams and press them in place. So, as we come over here and take a look, I have my seam side right closest to me and the opening side away from me. And one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my iron, and it's set on a nice high steam, and I'm going to just run it along that seam. And this sets the seam in place. It kind of helps the stitch to set with the fabric, and they work together now for their job. Now the other thing that we're going to do is press the seam open. And what I like to do is I set mine down and I work toward myself. So I pull the iron in front and I just move the fabric toward myself with the iron. And this is going to press that seam open. And I'm going to do the same thing every time I stitch a new strip on. And that will keep my seams set and my seam allowance moving in the same consistent direction. So, a few tips. When we're pressing our seams, we're not ironing back and forth. We're simply just moving it lightly. We're pressing it. We're not ironing it. We don't want to stretch the fabric when we're working. we simply want to let it get into place. So we'll look at this. You'll see the back. The seam is nice and flat. The seam allowance is laying neatly to one side. Now we're ready to go get that next piece of fabric and continue in our work. So remember, this was piece number 1 and this was piece number 2. So what we'll do is we scooch over and find piece number 3. And we're just going to stay in order. So this is 1, 2, and 3. Number 2 will go right sides together right on top. This is number 3. Number 3 will go right side together right on top of number 2. And we'll just simply continue stitching our pieces together until we end up with this. And that is one entire section of our strip piecing. There are 5 strips in one section. So when you finish the section, simply lay it aside and start the next one.